One thing I find really frustrating when building front-end apps is the fact that if my app needs to talk to an API, I always catch myself trying to predict what the properties of the data coming from that API looks like. So I end up making round trips between my browser's network tab and my code editor trying to figure out what exactly the property of a particular data item is called. Here's an example. Let's say we have a to-do app and I want to show the list of that to-do items. I want to show the title of the to-do items. Now the question is, what's the property for the title called? Is it called title? Is it called header? Is it called name? Or is the priority called priority? Is it called rating? Or is it called importance? So by the end of this video, I'm going to show you how to get around this problem and be a bit more strict or sure of what exactly the properties you're getting from an API looks like. We're going to do that with TypeScript, and we'll do it for a GraphQL API in a React app. So speaking of React app, let's go ahead and create one. Now run npx digit and clone this startup project. We'll call the app to do app. Then we'll cd into it and run npm install to install the dependencies. And then finally, we can open the project in a code editor. As you can see from the vite config file that this project was created using vite. Now the difference between running npm create vite versus using this startup project is the fact that I've gone ahead and installed the GraphQL library that will help us talk to the GraphQL API. And also, I've also configured vite so it plays nicely with that GraphQL library. And speaking of GraphQL, let's go ahead and create a GraphQL API. Head to your browser, go to the AWS console and search for AWS Amplify. And when you find it, open it. Once it's open, click on New App drop down and choose Build an App. And let's give the app a name and click Confirm Deployment. Once the app has been deployed, go ahead and click the Launch Studio button to open the studio for the app, to open the dashboard for the app, which is basically where we can manage all of the app's resources and also create an API. Click Data from the sidebar menu and click on Add Model, and let's add a to-do model. Let's add a title to the model, which is going to be required. And let's add a description as well. And then lastly, let's add a priority, which is going to be of type integer. And then we can go ahead and click Save and Deploy and confirm the deployment. Now behind the scene, Amplify is going to create an AppSync API. It's going to create a DynamoDB database, and this is going to take a few minutes. So what's going to happen is I'm going to jump out, and once this API has been created, we can jump back in and start using the API. Alright, we've successfully deployed our API. Before we can pull it into our React code, let's do one more thing, and that's to add some test content to the database. Click on the content menu from the sidebar, click Actions, and click Auto Generate Data. And let's generate 10 rows of data and add a few constraints. So the title should range between 2 and 5. The description should range between 1 or let's say 4 and 10. And the range, or the priority rather, should range between 1 and 5. And then we can go ahead and generate this test content. Now once the content is generated, head back to the data menu and copy the amplify pool command. Then head to your terminal. Before I run this command, please keep in mind that you have to install the Amplify CLI. I'm going to leave a link in the description for just a 2-minute guide that shows you how to set up and configure the CLI. That said, run the command, and Amplify is going to open a browser window for you to give the Amplify CLI access to your Amplify app. So click yes, and once the authentication is done, close the window, head back to the terminal, and choose the default answers for the prompt. Now what has happened is that Amplify has created this Amplify folder, and inside the folder we'll have this backend folder, and inside the backend folder we'll have an API folder that contains our schema. If you open the schema, you can see it has exactly the same properties with the table, with the model, with the data model we created in Amplify Studio. So we'll have our required title and our priority, which is an integer. But then we can't stop here. We want to do one more thing, which is to generate the actual TypeScript code that serves as a contract between this GraphQL API and our front-end code. And to do that, head back to the terminal and run amplify add codegen. The only thing we need to do here is to choose TypeScript and then choose the default prompt. Now head back to the code editor, and when you open the source folder, you should see we have an api.ts file. If you open it, you can see we have a to-do type which was generated by running amplify add codegen, and it exactly matches our GraphQL type, our GraphQL to-do type. So you can see we have the ID, the title, the optional description and priority as well, and a few other properties which the database kind of generated for us automatically, like created at and updated at. Now open the GraphQL file, and you can see we have all of our GraphQL queries, which matches all the GraphQL operations we need to make against this GraphQL API. So that's it. We can then go ahead and start using these queries to talk to our API. Before we can do that, let's open the main.tsx file and configure the GraphQL library with our AWS or with our API credentials. So let's import Amplify, which is the GraphQL library, and also import the credentials. And then finally we can call amplify.configure and pass it the credentials. Now this credentials file was created when we run amplify pool, and you can see it contains your API key. Now with that out of the way, we can then go ahead and head back to our app.tsx file and start talking to our API. So let's import a few things. First of all, we need to import the API object, and then we need to import the types that we're going to use to talk to this API. So the first type is GraphQL query from at AWS amplify /API. And then we can import the list to do query type, and lastly we can import our queries. Which is inside the GraphQL folder. Now the next step is to create a use effect hook, which is going to take a function, of course, and then inside the use effect hook we can create an async function and call the function fetch to do's. We can immediately call this function, and then inside the function we can create a variable to store our to-dos. And we can get the to-dos by calling api.graphql, which is going to take a GraphQL query and return a list of to-dos. Then we can go ahead and pass it the query for list of to-dos. Now this is the point we start reaping the fruit of our labor. So if you call all to-dos and hit dot, you can see we start getting IntelliSense for the data structure for this particular data. So if we access data and access all to-dos, we can see all of our items. And let's say we grab the first item and hit dot one more time, you can see all of the properties that are available on this particular data item. So let's say we just want to take a look at the title, and then we can start the app from the terminal and open it. And if I open the console, you can see that we have the title of our to-do logged to the console. And that's exactly how you set up TypeScript for GraphQL API in the easiest way possible. That said, thank you so much for sticking to the end of this video. I hope to see you in the next one. Bye.